Shall we start? Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being in attendance of this webinar. We are still waiting for people to come into the room, but I think we are going to start as we are already 6 minutes behind schedule. I'm Ruba Saleh. I'm a professor of anthropology at the University of Bologna, and I'm a member of the working group on human rights and academic freedom that was established by the European Association for Social Anthropology over the last summer, and particularly last May. The title of this webinar is Anthropological Responses to Scholasticide. And before I give the floor to our guests tonight, I wanted to introduce you to the reasons for this webinar, to the reasons why we thought this webinar was important and due, and also to the rationale behind the establishment of a working group on academic freedom at EASA. The working group was established by the EASA as executive, as mentioned earlier, in May 2024, to monitor the increasing restrictions and attacks on academic freedom that academics, students, and academic collectives have been facing for publicly sharing their anthropological analysis, their work on colonialism, on violence, or sometimes for simply posting on their private accounts their views, particularly on the Israeli violence unleashing in Gaza, a violence that the International Court of Justice has recently defined as a potential genocide. A violence that is televised and which evidence is available as it happens in real time. As the title of this webinar suggests, a dramatic and tragic dimension of this genocide is the destruction of the entire higher education sector of Gaza and of 80% of the school sector, and the killing of hundreds between academics, teachers, as well as thousands of students. Today, I want to remind the audience more than 600 students have no access to education in the Gaza Strip. This is what the title of this webinar is pointing to by referring to Scholasticide. The European Centre for Legal Support, which is tasked with supporting legally those who have been subject to threats, intimidation, repression, including within the higher education sector, has actually recently released some chilling data. Overall, they examined, and this is, I want to remind you, the tip of the iceberg, those who refer or are referring to the European Centre for Legal Support are only a tiny percentage of those who have been under threat or intimidation. So they have examined more than 1,000 cases of academic freedom violations in European countries and European higher education institutions. Most of these threats to academic freedom happen in certain countries, particularly Germany, the UK, but other countries are not at all out of the data that has been collected. So there are threats to academic freedom, potential disciplinary investigations, hundreds of cases regarding that, bureaucratic obstacles to events, nearly 100 cases have been reported on bureaucratic obstacles that are put to events that deal with Palestine-related issues. So in this context, of course, the work of the working group it goes without saying, very important, very needed. And let me add that incidents in which individuals or groups are prevented from using institution facilities are often not reported as violations of academic freedom, but are very prominent. So there is a very prominent number of cases where facilities are simply, for example, denied. So the working group is composed by myself, Chandana Mathur at Maynooth University, Helena Zodi at the Goethe University of Frankfurt, Hayal Akarsu at Utrecht University, and Julie Bilot at Geneva Graduate Institute. The working group's aims are, as mentioned, to monitor violations of academic freedom and to gather evidence on academic freedom and human rights restrictions, and to initiate policies accordingly, to also create structures of support, to provide guidelines for universities, to provide best practices on academic freedom, and to organize events such as this one. Just a couple more words before I pass on to our speakers the floor. As you know, or as many of the EASA members knows, recently a concerned group of members submitted a motion which asks the EASA membership to vote on suspending ties with Israeli academic institutions. The motion was approved at the last EASA conference in July in Barcelona, and next month we are called upon to express our vote on this motion, on the request to suspend ties. So we thought as working group, of course, and this is our first event, that it was of great importance to hold an informative session to help the membership form their views on this motion and on the vote that they're called to express in the coming month. So let me now present our three guests tonight. The first speaker is Professor Amal Bishara, who's a professor of anthropology at Tufts University, whose work focuses on settler colonialism, rights, and Palestinian political expression in Palestine. She is the author of many publications in these fields, including her most recent monograph, Crossing a Line: Laws, Violence, and Roadblocks to Palestinian Political Expression, which was published by Stanford University Press in 2022. She is also coordinating the Middle East section of the American Anthropology Association and is a member of the Board of Trustees of Insaniyat, the Society for Palestinian Anthropologists. Sarah Hmoud is a sociocultural anthropologist and is an assistant professor at the College of the Holy Cross. Her research interests lie at the intersections of transnational feminisms, women of color theory, indigenous and decolonial feminisms, critical race studies, carcerality, and Middle East and Arab American studies. Drawing upon these fields, her research theorizes the racialization of Palestinian women in Palestine and in the diaspora, and transnational Palestinian feminism and Palestinian feminist epistemologies. Her current book in progress is titled Al-Maqdasiyya, Palestinian Feminism and Decolonial Imaginary. Maya Wind is Andrew Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in the Department of Black Studies and Media and Cultural Studies at the University of California, Riverside. Her scholarship broadly investigates how settler societies and global systems of militarism and policing are sustained, with a particular focus on the reproduction and export of Israeli security expertise. And she is the renowned author of a book titled Powers of Ivory and Steel: How Israeli Universities Deny Palestinian Freedom, which was published by Verso. So thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours, Amal. I'm just going to say a couple of words on how the webinar works. So each speaker will have 10 to 12 minutes time to speak, and then we will have a Q&A. So you are free to post your questions in the chat. I'm going to collect the questions and pose them to the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the intrepid organizers of the Working Group on Human Rights and Academic Freedom. And I'm honored to be with this incredible group of speakers as well. As we speak, Israel's war on Gaza is expanding in terms of Israel's attacks on Lebanon that have killed more than 2,300 people and displaced 1.2 million people, as well as its attacks on Iran that threaten to escalate into an all-out war between these two regional powers. And Israel's genocidal war is also ferociously intensifying, as in the siege on North Gaza that is in its 24th day. According to Al Jazeera, Israeli attacks have killed at least 50 people, including 5 journalists, since Sunday. Over 1.8 million Palestinians in Gaza face extremely critical levels of hunger. And 133,000 people, or 6% of the population, are experiencing phase 5 or catastrophic food insecurity. Hope for recovering is in the rubble as well, as 70% of crop fields are destroyed. And we can think of all of the different ways in which hopes for a better future have been destroyed over the last year. Many months ago now, way back on January 26th, the International Court of Justice found that it is plausible that Israel is carrying out a genocide in Gaza, something so many of us knew even before that, protesting in the streets and watching what we were learning and seeing every single day in Gaza. On July 19th, a few months ago, the International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion on the illegality of occupation, something which so many experts and those of us following this occupation of the West Bank and Gaza for decades felt was a very long time in coming, and yet also we're grateful for the systematic analysis that it presented. We know that international law does not define the limits of our sense of justice. We know that international law was forged in colonial logics, and we know that it all too often is being implemented with racist and colonial logics. Nevertheless, in an emergency, I believe that it can be used to point out a path forward that a wide range of people will hear. And I think that this is something that we can use as a tool. And that's why I'm starting with this. The ICJ ruling from July says that all states have responsibilities not to recognize the occupation as legal and, quote, to render aid or assistance in maintaining the situation created by Israel's illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territory, end quote. And in a September statement, a whole bunch of UN experts with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights built on this July decision to say, and I'm going to read kind of a medium-long quote that excerpts their statement. I'm happy to put the link in the chat later. They called on people to, they called on states to, quote, impose a full arms embargo on Israel, halting all arms agreements, imports, exports, and transfers, including of dual-use items that could be used against the Palestinian population under occupation. Quote, continuing, ban goods and services emerging from both the colonization of occupied Palestinian territory and other unlawful activities that may be detrimental to Palestinian rights from entering their territory and markets, and take measures to label and permit goods and services emerging from Palestinian individuals and entities in occupied territory. Continuing to quote, they called on states to, quote, cancel or suspend economic relationships, trade agreements, and academic relations with Israel that may contribute to its unlawful presence and apartheid regime in the occupied Palestinian territory, end quote. They do conclude, last bit of quoting, that the failure to act now jeopardizes the entire edifice of international law and rule of law in world affairs. The world stands upon the edge of a knife. Either we travel collectively towards a future of just peace and lawfulness, or hurtle towards anarchy and dystopia, a world where might makes right, end quote. If these UN experts say that states are compelled to act in those ways, what does this mean for us as academics? What do we owe others as people, as those resident in North Atlantic states that are in a variety of ways supporting Israel's genocide? And what do we owe Palestinians as anthropologists? And then another question, what tools are at our disposal as a profession of anthropologists? There are, of course, many ways to answer these questions. One is to say very simply that taking action is our responsibility because genocide is a crime against humanity for which we all must mobilize. But some might say, what does academia have to do with this? And I'm going to let one of my fabulous co-speakers, Maya, address some elements of this regarding Israeli academia. For my part, I want to focus on how Israel's colonial violence impacts the world of Palestinian education, knowledge production, and expression, and has for many years. And it does so in ways that further obligate us to action as anthropologists. Again, I want to just remind us of that term that Ruba already mentioned of scholasticide, coined by Karma Nabulsi. In 2009, At that time, she pointed out how education is like the well of Palestinian society and of any society in rebellion. She's quoting her, education is the most important thing. It's part of the family life, part of your identity, and part of the rebellion. Everyone knows this. And in a refugee camp like Gaza, every child knows that in those same school desks sat your parents and your grandparents, whose tradition they carry on. When did she coin this term? In 2009? After, in that 2008-2009 Israeli war on Gaza, about 280 schools and kindergartens were destroyed. Now, a kindergartner whose school was destroyed in 2008 might now be finishing up university and would find their university destroyed as well, because we know that all universities have been destroyed in Gaza. And almost all school buildings, primary and secondary, have been destroyed partially or entirely following Israeli military strikes. Schools that we know have been turned into shelters, and in other cases into Israeli prison facilities where they're detaining and torturing Palestinians. I want to broaden the lens out from sort of strictly education and scholasticide to think about beyond education, how Israel attacks knowledge production, again, both before October 2023 and since October 2023. And I want to just, what I'm saying might sound kind of scattershot, but actually what I want to do is sort of point out the multifaceted ways in which this is happening. So, for example, in October 2021, Israel declared six premier human rights and civil society organizations to be terror organizations. These are Palestinian organizations that do this everyday work of gathering knowledge about Israel's occupation, including Adamir and El-Haq and Defense for Children Palestine, Defense for Children International Palestine. And again, these are, organizations that are at the core of Palestinian civil society and organizations whom, for example, me as an anthropologist, as a Palestinian scholar, I cite and refer to their work all the time, right? The declaration of them to be terrorist organizations threatened their work, inhibits their fundraising and travel, makes them vulnerable to arrest. And also you could say, for certain people, it might make their knowledge itself seem to be less credible, even though, again, they are at the forefront of the work and the fields that they're doing. Israel has limited who can teach in Palestinian universities. In August 22, new regulations came out where Israel was going to determine whether lecturers could come into West Bank universities if they had, quote, whether or not they had unique expertise in their field, as determined by none other than Israeli military authorities. It would also limit the time that they could teach in these into Palestinian universities. And of course, these 2022 regulations built on existing restrictions, both formal and informal, on who can teach in Palestinian institutions of higher education. And we know that since 2017, Israel has also prohibited the entry of, has also prohibited entry into Israel for people who support tactics, nonviolent tactics of sanctioning Israel. Also, I want to point out, finally, a huge world in which, or a huge part of our worlds in which Israel's multifaceted forms of legal, bureaucratic, and outright military violence suppress Palestinian knowledge production, and that is journalism. Israel killed at least 20 Palestinian journalists in the 22 years before this war started, and no one had been held responsible for those crimes, creating an atmosphere of impunity for such killings. Since October 7th, by the Committee to Protect Journalists' conservative methodology, 123 Palestinian journalists and 6 Lebanese journalists have been killed by the Israeli military since October 7th. And I would just say that is 3 more than the last time I presented on this, which was Thursday. So for all of us who are doing this work, the statistics and numbers change every single day in terrifying ways. There have also been a vast increase in the number of arrests of Palestinian journalists, including 69 arrests of journalists, 43 remaining under arrest. I can talk more about the conditions of those arrests later. Closing down of Al Jazeera through laws inside Israel's 1948 territories, and through military order in Ramallah. We can talk more about both of those shutdowns and what they mean and how they operate. And then finally, last week, accusations that 6 Al Jazeera journalists are affiliated with Islamic Jihad or Hamas, including 2 journalists who are among the last people to be reporting in northern Gaza. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, but I do it in part to emphasize how very hard Palestinians are working today and every day, the risks they are taking to produce knowledge that the world must use to stop these crimes. It might seem strange to put these apparently disparate topics together, the destructions of schools and press offices, legal shutdowns of journalistic institutions, killings of journalists, terrorist declarations, killings of professors. But together, when we put them together, we can see that Israel uses all the means at its disposal to smash expression and knowledge production, to try to dictate global narratives about this war and its settler colonial apartheid state, and to crush Palestinian worlds of knowledge and creativity. They are attacks on Palestinians' ability to produce authoritative knowledge and express ourselves as individuals and as part of organizations. I want to emphasize to you all that we are part of that world of knowledge and expression. Really, their work compounds the debt that we owe. We depend on the risks they take because we cite, read, watch, and share the work of these Palestinian scholars, human rights workers, journalists, and many others. When Palestinian journalists and scholars are killed, our world too is impoverished. Some might argue that the EASA resolution would restrict academic freedom and freedom of expression, but I want to underscore we do not have that freedom of expression today when we think on this global scope. The EASA resolution recognizes that through our practice of knowledge production, we are part of the same world as these Palestinians. We are responsible for shaping the worlds of knowledge production that we live in together. And not to mention the world in which new generations of Palestinian children must someday go back to kindergarten or go back to college. So it is with a little bit of hope that I say that if we can take action now, we can have a freer world of knowledge production, creativity, and safety and security for all in the future. However very distant that certainly seems today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amal. And I'll now pass the microphone or the floor to Sarah Mahmoud.
Thank you so much to my colleagues who have organized this important conversation. And thank you, Amal, for that incredibly powerful and moving talk that you just gave. I'm speaking to you today as a Palestinian anthropologist, as a feminist, and as a mother of Palestinian children. One of the central tenets of an indigenous, decolonial, and feminist anthropological tradition and anthropology for liberation is to think with and alongside the lived experiences and analytics of those struggling for liberation from the racial, colonial, and civilizational hierarchies that oppress us all. Indeed, the methods and praxis that we choose to engage as anthropologists are not just ways of gathering data, but are also ethical and political principles through which we create knowledge and intervene in the world. As Palestinian anthropologists, there are 2 central fronts that we must struggle on if we are to be intentional about embodying a praxis in alignment with an anthropology of liberation. The first is the creation of insurgent knowledge that is aligned with our people's struggle for liberation and justice. In other words, we must work to create anthropological knowledge that helps us to better understand our collective condition as Palestinians, and more specifically, to contribute to our people's liberation from Zionist colonialism, heteropatriarchy, and all interconnected structures of power that degrade Palestinian humanity and diminish life chances. We must commit ourselves to the production of knowledge that, in some small way, honors and uplifts the daily life and world-making possibilities that our people wage as they struggle against carceral and militarized regimes of violence and oppression. The second front we must commit ourselves to engage is the struggle within the realm of the colonial academy and the discipline of which we are a part. That is, to challenge head-on the attempted erasure of the ecologies of our indigenous knowledge systems. This includes organizing to interrupt the scholasticide waged by the Israeli state that is invested in the destruction of our universities and spaces of learning, the targeting, captivity, and killing of our scholars and intellectuals, and organizing to protect our colleagues in occupied territory whose bodies and lives are directly targeted by the coercive violence of the Israeli state. It also means organizing to disrupt the compulsory Zionism that continues to shape the academic and other spaces of which we are a part, spaces rife with the structural racism of anti-Arab sentiments and Islamophobia, rendering us as Palestinian scholars as always outside the realm of rationality and the scholarly authority of Western colonial academia. Today, we find ourselves in the space of Palestinian diaspora, of bearing witness to the genocide of our people in Gaza and beyond. This painful reality, which many of our colleagues have been hesitant to face, compels us to embrace the responsibility of taking up the mantle of ethnographic inquiry in service of the imperatives of political and epistemic decolonization. This is part of the debt we owe to our martyrs and to those who are struggling on the front lines to survive this genocide. In the spirit of these suggestions, and as a feminist anthropologist, I would like to use the remainder of my time to bring your attention to the catastrophic situation of women and children in Gaza, and in particular to the issue of what, following feminist activists, I am calling reproductive genocide. An estimated 5,500 women are expected to give birth in Gaza in the next month, of whom 840 are likely to experience pregnancy or birth-related complications, needing additional medical care that is simply not available. The forced starvation of the Palestinian population of Gaza is having serious repercussions for pregnant women. UNFPA states that an estimated 46,300 pregnant women in Gaza are experiencing crisis levels of hunger. More than 17,000 pregnant women are on the verge of famine, while 11,000 pregnant women are already in famine. Indeed, medical experts point to the fact that the consequences of Israel's targeting of Palestinian women's ability to give birth safely will be intergenerational. As leading medical expert and surgeon, Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta reminds us, early on during the invasion of Al-Shifa Hospital in November 2023, Israel dropped white phosphorus bombs on the maternity ward. There is no access to pre- or postnatal care. Women are forced to have cesarean section operations without anesthesia, and healthcare workers report a, quote, 300% increase in the miscarriage rate among pregnant women in Gaza since Israel's attacks began in October, end quote, as the lack of supplies due to Israel's ongoing bombardment and blockade has made the conditions of carrying healthy pregnancies exceedingly difficult. Stillbirth and maternity mortality rates have also risen dramatically. Furthermore, there are incidents of women needing hysterectomies after what should have been uncomplicated deliveries due to the lack of services to handle birth complications, consequently impacting their abilities to have children in the future. These immediate outcomes are necessarily interwoven with more permanent medical conditions. Mothers starved of the caloric intake they need during the time of birth bear children who are underweight. Children born underweight grow to be adults that are more susceptible to non-communicable diseases, an increased risk in brain damage, and more, illustrating how the ecology of war is inflicted as an intergenerational assault on Palestinian life. I want to bring in the story of one young woman as a powerful ethnographic testament that was shared by colleagues at Birzeit University's Institute for Women's Studies. Maryam Mansour-Loh is one of 50,000 women who have given birth recently in the occupied Gaza Strip. She was forced to leave her home in Beit Lahia in northern Gaza at the beginning of the war during her 6th month of pregnancy. Quote, I entered my 7th month of pregnancy while in a tent in one of the makeshift shelters, she wrote on January 12, 2024. And with the great stress, lack of cleanliness, lack of resources, food, and water, it was extremely tiring, end quote. Miriam's testimony highlights the gendered labor of navigating the everyday life of displacement, and terror, intensified by the labor of carrying and nurturing Palestinian life. Quote, I had to walk a long distance to reach the bathroom, and then wait in line for around an hour, and sometimes more than an hour to use the bathroom. I reached the point that I lost the ability to walk, and I experienced all labor symptoms while in my 7th month. So I was forced to return to Gaza City so that I could stay at my aunt's house and rest because of the intense pain. But the severity of the bombing, the siege, and the lack of food and water reached the point where I had to feed my children rotten bread in Gaza, and so led me to go back through the Israeli army checkpoint to walk in front of their tanks, jeeps, and snipers, under the planes and bombings, and past the corpses thrown on the road in order to reach the tent shelters in the south again. My suffering started again, and I entered my 8th month with pain and fatigue, anemia, insomnia, difficulty breathing, and fear of giving birth prematurely. Miriam's testimony highlights the fact that it is not just the protracted denial of medical care, food, and daily essentials that endangers women's ability to nurture and care for Palestinian life. The destruction of Gaza's infrastructure, coupled with forced displacement and the militarization of neighborhoods, enhanced the everydayness of social suffering. I started to count the days I would enter my 9th month and near the end of my pregnancy, writes Miriam. Thank God, I entered my 9th month, but a new suffering began, searching for clothes for the baby. Alongside my responsibility already for two children, I have to wash their clothes by hand and bathe them in cold water because we don't find heated water. We cook over a fire, and there's great suffering in providing food, water, and bread. It all comes with suffering. Our days are nearly wasted from morning until late at night as we search for water, work to light a fire, cook, wash clothes, and knead bread. And not to mention the tenfold increase in prices for goods, the lack of any income for most families, and the discontinuation of essential goods in the shops. I've written these words in a tent as I'm in pain and near the end of my pregnancy, waiting to give birth at any moment. How will this child live, like so many children who were born in tents and makeshift shelters? In her final words, Miriam underscores that the suffering she and her children have been forced to endure is not an individual suffering, but a collective one. What will become of her and her newborn child, of her children's futures? Indeed, the assault on women's bodies and sexualities is compounded by and interconnected with the assault on Palestinian children. The Israeli army has killed 2,100 Palestinian infants and toddlers under the age of 2, out of the more than 17,000 children it has killed in Gaza since October 7, 2023. An estimated 20,000 children are still missing under the rubble. The number of Palestinian children killed by Israeli military forces, whether infants or children, is, quote, unprecedented in the history of modern warfare, end quote. Thousands more have been maimed and lost limbs that will require years of rehabilitation and medical care. UNICEF estimates that in the first 3 months of the genocide alone, at least 1,000 children lost one or both legs, which has been termed an amputee crisis. Israel is materially and physically debilitating the next generation of Palestinian life. This is reproductive genocide. In theorizing reproductive genocide, we must understand that the Israeli state's persistent and targeted efforts to diminish the life-giving capacities of Palestinians are intimately intertwined with the attempted destruction and contamination of Palestinian land and life-sustaining ecologies, including, quote, the annihilation of our agricultural and food infrastructures, the degradation of our water and air through mass weapons bombardment, and the exposure of our communities to toxic waste, chemical weapons, and hazardous environments that will have long-term effects on the health of future generations and the livability of Gaza, end quote. In short, the invasion of our bodies, sexualities, and life-giving capacities as Indigenous people are strategic and interconnected with the invasion and occupation of our homeland and its capacity to sustain Palestinian life and our future generations. The time for action is now. Anthropologists across the globe have a duty in this moment to speak out, advocate, and organize to interrupt the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. Palestinian liberation is not only, as Angela Davis has suggested, the moral litmus test of our time. For anthropologists, speaking out, advocating, and organizing to interrupt and end this genocide is a moral and political litmus test for the colonial discipline we have all inherited. Can European anthropologists at the heart of colonial empire rise to the occasion? Or will you leave us, your Palestinian colleagues, and our children buried under the actual and proverbial rubble? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. I'm not commenting, as I think I want to leave space for, I hope, a lively Q&A session. So I'm keeping all my feelings and comments to myself for now. And I'll now pass the floor to Maya Wynn. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruba, and to EASA working group for hosting us for this important conversation. And thank you so much, Amal and Sarah. I'm always grateful to be in conversation, and thank you for what you have offered us all today. So the motion on which EASA members are currently voting calls for ending collaborations with Israeli academic institutions. We have just heard from both Amal and Sarah very powerful arguments about why supporting this motion is absolutely critical and why it is a matter of incredible urgency in the face of the ongoing genocide. And so today I want to offer two arguments about why all EASA members must support this motion. And the first is that what we are witnessing, and this has been spoken to, but again, this conversation today is about Scholasticide. What we are witnessing in Gaza is not only a genocide, but an escalation in Israel's decades-long project of Scholasticide, of the intentional and systematic destruction of Palestinian centers of education. And Scholasticide, it is really important to note, cannot be understood solely as a project of the Israeli state, the Israeli military, or Israeli weapons companies. It is also no less a project that is directly and materially facilitated by Israeli universities. Israeli institutions of higher education have, from their founding, been deeply implicated in Israeli settler colonialism and can only really be understood as settler universities. And what we mean by this is that they are embedded in the infrastructure that sustains Israeli society as a settler society. Israeli universities have for decades been pillars of Israel's system of apartheid and Israeli racial rule. And over the course of the last year, they have also been active agents in this genocide. And I want to offer just three examples. The first is academic training. All Israeli public universities offer their facilities, faculty, and expertise for Israeli military training, advancing the career development of soldiers and security state personnel. For soldiers, this is through a program called Atuda, which is Hebrew for academic reserve. These are specialized degree-granting programs for soldiers run by the Israeli military and the Ministry of Defense in collaboration with weapons manufacturers and the Administration for the Development of Weapons and Technological Infrastructure. The Atuda program was developed very explicitly to offer the Israeli military a cadre of highly educated and specialized soldiers amidst what is otherwise a draft of high school seniors. At Tel Aviv University's faculties of social science and humanities, soldiers are currently enrolled in the prestigious EASA degree-granting program to become officers in combat units to be sent to Gaza. The Department of Islamic and Middle East Studies at Hebrew University is currently training intelligence corps soldiers through the elite program Chabatzalot, through which soldiers are offered linguistic and regional expertise to aid in the military rule of Palestinians. Many Chabatzalot graduates serve in Unit H200 of the Intelligence Corps, responsible for the mass surveillance of all Palestinian phone calls, text messages, and emails, and have served this genocide by creating mass target banks to guide Israeli killing of Palestinians in Gaza. Another is weapons development. On other corners of campus, faculty and students are working to develop weapons. Rafael, Elbit Systems, Israel Aerospace Industries, Israel's largest weapons producers and now global exporters, were not only birthed, in fact, by Israeli universities, but continue to be sustained by them to this day. These corporations develop and refine technologies and weapons used against occupied Palestinians and then sold abroad as battle-proven on this basis. And university campuses offer themselves as critical laboratories for this development. Some of the weapons and technologies used in Gaza for the very first time just this past year, new drones and missiles, among others, were already put on display in Singapore this spring, and as well as in other places, after their use to commit war crimes. A third is knowledge production. Diverse academic disciplines, including legal studies, ethics, criminology, archaeology, and Middle East studies, among many others in the Israeli Academy, have for decades been producing expertise for the Israeli state to sustain apartheid rule and have been expanding their own scholarship and fields through this collaboration. And I want to just mention a few examples for our purposes today. So in archaeology, this field was developed in the Israeli Academy in and through the occupation of Palestinian territory and through the systematic looting of Palestinian artifacts and illegal excavations in occupied territory. The discipline has served to scientifically substantiate Israeli claims to the land and to erase Palestinian and Muslim history, as well as to erase them in the present through dispossessing entire Palestinian communities and expanding Jewish settlement under the aegis of excavations and curating historic sites. Artifacts looted earlier in 2023 from Isra University in Gaza, before Israel blew it up, are already in Israeli possession and are made available for Israeli researchers and the Israeli public. Middle East studies is another discipline that developed out of collaboration between Israeli universities and the military government and became an important site for the state to hone regional and linguistic expertise to better rule and subjugate Palestinians. Israeli Middle East so-called experts based at Israeli universities are currently using their platforms and academic credentials to call for the annihilation of Gaza through what has been termed, among others, the General's Plan of ethnically cleansing the north of the Gaza Strip and designating all Palestinians who remain there as combatants and targets for killing. Legal studies and ethics are additional fields in the Israeli Academy that for years have developed interpretations of international humanitarian law to sanction what we all have long known, but what has now been made official by the International Court of Justice is an illegal occupation. But not only that, they have also sanctioned a wide range of war crimes. Israeli legal scholars collaborated with military personnel to offer justifications for military tactics and doctrines, including extrajudicial assassinations, new forms of torture, and disproportionate use of force against civilian populations. The impunity with which Israel has been operating for over a year has in fact been decades in the making, and universities have made it possible. Faculty of law have also mobilized very explicitly to manipulate evidence of genocidal intent and to craft legal arguments in support of the Israeli team dedicated to thwarting the case brought by South Africa to the ICJ just this year. As Israel has destroyed all of the universities in the Gaza Strip by aerial bombardment or controlled detonation, leaving over 88,000 students with no physical campus to attend, not a single Israeli university administration has called on the Israeli government to cease the intentional decimation of Palestinian higher education. And this is not coincidental, given that Israeli universities not only sustain settler colonialism and apartheid, but themselves are actively supporting this genocide. Over the past year, they have enlisted their institute's resources and courses to craft Hasbara, Israeli state propaganda, to defend Israel from international criticism. They have been producing legal scholarship to shield Israel from accountability for its war crimes in this genocide. They are training soldiers and developing weapons used against Palestinians in Gaza. They are granting special benefits, scholarships, and even course credit to reserve soldiers returning from Gaza to their classrooms. They are punishing students and faculty, primarily Palestinian, who dare to speak out, including by collaborating with the Israeli police to subject their Palestinian students to arrest and criminal investigation for their social media posts or campus organizing. Israeli universities are complicit in genocide. And this leads me to the second argument. And thank you both Amal and Sarah, for already raising this question, and I want to reiterate it. I think it bears repeating. What is it that we owe our Palestinian colleagues? The North American and European university system, the EU government through projects like Horizon Europe, are, as senior Israeli academic and security official put it, the oxygen of Israeli universities. In the face of the escalation and acceleration of Israel's decades-long project of ethnic cleansing and of scholasticide, the Palestinian Federation of Unions of University Professors and Employees, as well as every Palestinian University Student Union, have, alongside the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, PACB, reiterated the call to international colleagues to join the movement to hold Israeli universities accountable for their long-standing, structural, and systematic complicity in Israeli settler colonialism, apartheid, and now genocide. We are not bystanders. Our own universities and academic institutions, which support and legitimize and fund Israeli universities, are deeply implicated. It has never been more urgent to end our own direct complicity and join the movement for Palestinian liberation, and it begins with voting yes on this motion before you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maya. Thank you, Amal and Sarah. I think you have given our audience so much to think about, and we are so very grateful for your contributions tonight. I think they help our audience, the members of EASA, to really get a sense of what's at stake and what kind of measures can be taken to help Palestinian academics and Palestinian civil society, what remains of it, to survive really, and to possibly, as Amal was saying in her contribution, to continue to exist and thrive in the future as fully fledged members of this humanity. I obviously have a lot of thoughts and questions in my mind that I wanted to pose to you, as I think we are approaching the time when a vote will be, we are asked to be voting in the next month from the 1st to the 31st of November on this motion. So we will have a month as members of this community to express our vote. I'm sure the audience has questions to you about the various aspects of what a vote involves, and how can a vote take us one step away from this carnage, if at all. And so I'm gonna just start from some questions that have been shared on the chat.